Hi, my name's Tristan, and I'm the host of the Gravel Cycling Australia podcast. I was born, raised, and continue to live, work, and ride my bike on the lands of the Wurundjeri and the Wadawurrung people. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. The Gravel Cycling Australia podcast acknowledges that Aboriginal sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. The suspension is... I just keep coming back to the fact about how subtle it is. Like, you barely notice it doing its job, but it's when you tackle those sort of rougher sections on those parts, you're like, oh, actually, you know what, that didn't jolt me around, and I was able to maintain my speed through that section in a way that I haven't previously been able to. Welcome to the Gravel Cycling Australia podcast. Gravel cycling in Australia is booming. From racing to bikepacking to simply getting off the beaten track and exploring the back roads and trails of our outstanding natural landscapes. This accessible subculture is all about community, adventure, and discovering or rediscovering the joy of life on two wheels. Join us as we celebrate Australia's gravel cycling scene and discover the locations, explore the events, and meet the people at the heart of the sport. Welcome back to a special episode of the Gravel Cycling Australia podcast. This was actually a segment that I was going to put into the intro of the last episode with Connor Sens, but I ended up talking for about 20 minutes about about this bike. So I thought I'd cut it out, put it in a special episode, and maybe this is a new format for the podcast. We can do some more of these sort of short format, quite casual bike reviews. As with the last episode, I did this recording with my little daughter on my lap, so you'll hear a few little coos throughout. Hopefully that just adds a bit of character. So without any further ado, let's get into my thoughts on the Giant Revolt X Advanced Pro 2. I've been really lucky enough to be riding a Giant Revolt X Advanced Pro 2 over the last couple of weeks, and a huge shout out to Giant Melbourne, a dealer here in Melbourne. You can find them at the top end of Burke Street in the city. So full disclosure, I was in need of a bike. As you know, I'm in the market, and I knew I was going on this trip, so I reached out to Giant Melbourne and just asked if they had a demo that I could borrow. I was keen to try this bike, and I thought it was a good opportunity, and they were great. They got me on the bike super quick, and whilst I obviously benefited from getting the bike for the weekend, this review is not sponsored. It's not paid for. This is completely my opinion of the bike. So hopefully I want to do a bit more of this to bring you a bit more tech reviews, and hopefully we can get some more bikes through the stable in the coming months, and we can build out sort of the tech side of this podcast and bring you some of this content through the YouTube channel as well, is sort of where I'm hoping to take this. So just wanted to be upfront about where these opinions coming from and where this experience started. Yeah, they've hooked me up with this excellent gravel bike, which I took up this weekend to ride around the Lerderderg and Wombat State Forests. So I was up there for a long weekend for a wedding, and managed to pop out and get a few rides in. So it's a really exciting bike. It's one of those ones that sort of takes gravel bikes and pushes them really into the off-road adventure space. We're running a RockShox Rudy suspension fork, a dropper post, mullet sort of gearing. So it's a very different bike to one that I've ridden before, and I had a great time out on it. I guess I've only had a few rides, so I'm not going to provide sort of a full review, but just some initial impressions. So just on the frame itself, so Giant have designed this frame around the suspension fork, so its geometry has been adjusted based on the standard rigid Revolt. So the reason that's important is that with the suspension forks, they have a longer axle crown length. So if you just pop them on a normal bike, even if it is technically compatible, it is going to bring the front end of the bike up a bit, and it's just going to affect the whole handling. So by adjusting that geometry, by making that really short head tube, Giant's maintaining sort of the stack and reach sort of general proportions that you'd get on a standard rigid forked Revolt. So that means that this is not like riding a mountain bike. I think a lot of people will comment that these bikes sort of, why not just get a 90s mountain bike? But you really are like you're not getting that sense. You really are still riding a gravel bike. And on that note, I just want to talk a bit about the suspension fork. So I was really, really keen to try this because when I've taken my previous rigid gravel bikes out to sort of my gnarlier riding around the surf coast, I've really like keen to get off the sort of standard gravel roads, which are great. But then there's all these other sort of fire tracks, trails, rocky goat tracks, whatever you want to call them, that run sort of up and down the hills. And yeah, I've always been keen to sort of jump up and give those ones a go on the gravel bike. But what you find is that in a lot of those scenarios, the tracks are either just a little bit too rough going for sort of the standard gravel bike setup. So I was sort of thinking, like, is a suspension gravel bike going to be the answer? Is it going to allow me to tackle those trails from start to finish without having to jump off and push a bit, or, you know, go around the huge ruts, that sort of thing. So yeah, I was really, really keen to try out this bike. It was actually much more subtle than I was expecting, the difference. Like the fork on the standard gravel roads, you barely notice it's there. And I guess perhaps one negative is you can feel it being a little bit heavier, maybe slows down the handling a little bit around the front end. But even on those sort of really quite well-maintained gravel roads, the fork really comes into its own on the descents. Like you can definitely sort of feel that better control and traction that you get on the descents, and that was sort of combined with the effect of the dropper. Like I was really happy to drop the post, even on sort of some of those sort of standard gravel descents, because it just allows you to shift that weight back, get much more control. The combination of the fork and that better weight distribution for off-road descending, it really adds a lot of confidence. And I reckon there's a huge speed advantage also to be gained for racers out there on descents from having a suspension fork and dropping the post. When you take it off-road, the fork continues to excel. Like on the smoother parts of those rockier off-road tracks, so there's a sweet spot where this bike is about as much fun as I've ever had on a gravel bike. Like those slightly rough tracks where perhaps on a rigid fork you're having to slow down, you're just getting bounced around a little bit. This bike just absolutely guns it on those trails, and yeah, super, super fun. And even in that scenario, like the suspension is, I just keep coming back to the fact about how subtle it is. Like you barely notice it doing its job, but it's when you tackle those sort of rougher sections on those paths, you're like, oh, actually, you know what, that didn't jolt me around, and I was able to maintain my speed through that section in a way that I haven't previously been able to. One of the places I found it really shined was actually on the ascents, on those really technical, rocky tracks that are quite steep. Like in the past, on a rigid fork, you probably hit one of those rocks and it just kind of makes you lose your momentum and can really slow you down. And when you're halfway up a 20% off-road gravel climb, that can really take the wind out of your sails. Where with this, like it allows you just, if you've got a bit of power, you just push through and you'll just sort of glide over some of those rockier, more technical climbs. So yeah, I think a real advantage there as well. Despite all that, I certainly still reach sort of my limit. As I said, the geometry is not that different to a normal gravel bike. The fork is great, but it's only 40 mils of travel. It's not riding a mountain bike. So I still hit a few sections where I was jumping off, whether it was going uphill or down or, around some huge ruts. I was like, nah, this bike is still a gravel bike. And yeah, it's not going to get me at least through some of those really, really, really gnarly sections, which to be honest are really the domain of mountain bikes. One thing I did think while riding this fork, enjoying the excellent control you get on the descents, was, maybe I don't want to go that much faster downhill on a gravel bike, particularly at the time of morning I ride. I'm always a bit cautious about the roos jumping out. And whilst this bike might let me tackle those descents a bit faster, I think that, in the back of my head, I'm just thinking that's a faster speed I'm going to hit Skippy with. So, just something else to think about. I did do a couple of little steep on-road sections, and I didn't get much of a sense of a bob. This is a fork that doesn't even have a lockout on it, the RockShox Ready. You can buy from SRAM an upgrade Fit 4 damper, I think it's called, to give you that lockout capability, but it's not standard on the spec'd version of the fork. So it's running a SRAM Apex group set, as I said, in the mullet setup with the Eagle rear derailleur and the 1050 rear cassette, 40-tooth chainring. So that I just like. I've heard a lot about. I've never ridden single, I guess, one by group sets before, and I've sort of heard a lot of negatives about them, perhaps sort of more on the faster end of things. But look, this group set was absolutely flawless. I was kind of blown away by how good it was. You know, it's a relatively affordable group set, electronic shifting. But I think the thing that struck me the most was just how effective that one-by system was. Like, I didn't feel any issues with gearing jumps, and maybe that's a function of the sort of riding I was doing, sort of hills up and down on the gravel. I really thought I would miss a front derailleur whilst riding. I really didn't miss it at all. That group set is really quite phenomenal, and I think I'll struggle to go back to anything else. And perhaps most impressively, like, we're talking about SRAM's 4th tier group set here. This is not high end stuff. Yes, it's still an expensive piece of kit, but it's 4th tier. It's aimed at the people, and yeah, full kudos to SRAM. It's really, really impressive. Now let's talk about the wheels. Beautiful carbon wheels from Giant, hookless CXR ones. Very loud free hub, so if that's an issue for you, have a think about that. But the wheels really pick up nicely. As I said, super light and really responsive, and add to the climbing experience you get on this bike. And for the value of this bike as well, this particular model is selling at Giant Melbourne for $4,999. So yeah, for that price, you're getting a excellent carbon frame, super responsive. You know, as soon as I jumped on, I could feel that bottom bracket stiffness and the power transfer. It's definitely all there. You're getting that, you know, excellent Rudy suspension fork and the post-modern dropper, as well as these excellent carbon wheels, which are, you know, wide, stiff, and excellent, comfortable ride. So yeah, it's certainly a bike that offers a lot of value for your money. So that's a bit of a background on the suspension fork, the frame, some of the spec, that group set. But where does that leave us in terms of this bike? Does this setup really allow you to take your gravel bike and push it further into that adventure realm? Can you get everything you want from a gravel bike on the road and yet take it further and adventure farther off the road? And I guess where I'm sitting now, having ridden it for a while, is actually in quite a surprising place. I actually have a very different perspective and opinion about what this bike is and what it offers and who it's for than I did coming into this. So does it adequately cover that whole spectrum? I don't think it really does. I think this is still a gravel bike, and it's not going to take you where a mountain bike would. As I said before, this bike absolutely excels in its particular use case, which I think is those those really rough fire trails that are not too technical, but they're not smooth like a nice gravel road. In that scenario, this bike is absolutely phenomenal. And if that's the sort of riding that you're doing every day and predominantly for most of your rides, like, I can't really think of a better bike. Like, if you want that gravel riding experience, you don't want to go to a mountain bike, you still want your drop bars, but you just want a little bit of extra compliance on those particular sort of trails, then I think you're going to love this bike. And whilst it offers a bit more performance and compliance in a particular use case, that does come with a compromise. And I think from an experience of riding gravel point of view, if you're looking for that pure sort of road-like experience, but on gravel roads, which I think a lot of people are, then this does come with a compromise. It comes back to this age-old adage, right? Like, there's no one bike that is going to allow you to get through every piece of trail that you want with the perfect experience that you want. So whilst that suspension fork adds, you know, an excellent experience off-road, just that extra weight and that just slight slowing of the handling that you notice, particularly climbing, but also just, you know, riding fast on the flat, just does detract ever so slightly from that, as I said, that pure riding experience. But that brings me back to the positives of this fork at the same time. I don't have any data to back this up, but purely from riding this bike, I reckon the bike that this is for is a roadie who wants to race and go fast on courses, particularly that have a lot of descending. And I'm thinking back to to something like the GOG that I've done in the past. And, I've ridden my rigid gravel bike on that, and I've felt really good going uphill, held with a pack, being great. But as soon as the road started pointing down, I just lost a little bit of confidence in some of those more, loose, sketchy gravel corners or the steeper parts. And particularly in that event, you see a lot of people on mountain bikes, and they were flying past me at incredible speeds down this hill. And I think, if you're racing and chasing a great time at an event, then the loss that you're going to feel going uphill is going to be quite minor. We're talking less than a kilo in weight here, but the time that you can extract going downhill, purely based on the extra control and traction that you get from both the suspension fork but also the dropper post, I think that has the potential to cut minutes out of people's time over the course of these long events. So as I said before, my opinion of who this bike is for has actually changed significantly. I don't think this is necessarily a bike for someone who wants to go and get rowdy, but I think this is a bike for a racer who wants to go fast. And I'm kind of baffled as why Giant don't market the bike in that way. They've kept a fairly racy geometry here. There's more and more evidence that wider tyres can be significantly faster in particularly technical scenarios like gravel, and the suspension fork, which keeps that tyre in contact with the ground more often as you, at high speed, come down potentially rocky, loose gravel roads, then you're going to get more traction, which is allowing you to maintain your speed, as I say, much, much better through the descent. So I think I've cracked the code of who this bike is for, and it's not necessarily who you might think or even maybe who Giant think it is. For the rest of us who ride gravel for the fun of it, I think you've just got to make the choice. Like, you're better off getting something like a standard Giant Revolt and, with the rigid fork, and then maybe if you want to tackle some of those more off-road sections, save that for your mountain biking days. And that thought alone has opened up an absolute can of worms in my mind, because all of a sudden I'm researching mountain bikes and maybe planning to add one of those to the stable to help me explore those gnarly tracks. Might have to ask the guys down at Giant Melbourne if they've got a Fathom or a Rain for me to try out. N+1, eh? Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to my little rambling thoughts about this bike, but I hope that has pulled it together a little bit for you, given you a bit more of an insight into gravel suspension, what it does to your bike, and what benefits and pros and cons that come with that. So happy to chat to anyone who wants to talk bikes. That's the whole reason behind why I started this podcast, was to have conversations with people about gravel bikes, because I bloody love them, you love them, let's do it. If you want to hear more bike reviews like this, let me know what you liked, what you didn't like about the style and the format, and we'll see where we can take it. And if you want to support the channel to do more content like this, then please become a supporter of the show. You can do that down there in the show notes, and share with your riding mates and your friends about the podcast. Let them know what we're doing here, and we'd love to have them on board as part of the community. Thanks for listening. I'm Tristan Reed, your host of the Gravel Cycling Australia podcast.